Thank you, David. Dale, if you want to know more about heaven, I just recommend to you real quick, and I don't get commission from publishers. I probably should. There's a good book. The name of it is simply Heaven, written by a man by the name of Randy Alcorn, Alcorn, and it's a great book. Just fills in, answers the questions you might have about heaven, and it's kind of done that way. It's not real difficult to read. It's a question. It's kind of the question you're looking for. You go and you can read that section. You don't have to read it from cover to cover, but it's a great book about heaven and clears up some confusion. And if you got any questions that I think many of you, I believe, would enjoy. I've loaned my copy out a time or two. I don't usually loan books because I never see them again, but and I'm not sure if that one's back or not. But I said it's a good book if you want to pick it up. If you Kindle, iPad, whatever, or the hard copy, it's a great book. All right, this morning, if you will, open your Bible to the book of James. While you're finding that little book, I want to share with you an excerpt from his and her diary on the same day, and see if this sounds familiar to anybody. If you can identify with this story. Her diary. Tonight, I thought my husband was acting weird. We had made plans to meet at a nice restaurant for dinner. I was shopping with my friends all day long, so I thought he was upset at the fact that I was a bit late, but he made no comment on it. Conversation wasn't flowing, so I suggested that we go somewhere quiet so we could talk. He agreed, but he didn't say much. I asked him what was wrong. He said nothing. I asked him if it was my fault that he was upset. He said he wasn't upset, that it had nothing to do with me. Not to worry about it. On the way home, I told him that I loved him. He smiled slightly and kept driving. I can't explain his behavior, and I don't know why he didn't say I love you too. When we got home, I felt as if I had lost him completely, as if he wanted nothing to do with me anymore. He just sat there quietly and watched TV. He continued to seem distant and absent. Finally, with silence all around us, I decided to go to bed. About 15 minutes later, he came to bed, but I still felt that he was distracted and his thoughts were somewhere else. He fell asleep. I cried. I don't know what to do. I'm almost sure that his thoughts are with someone else. My life is a disaster. His diary. Motorcycle won't start. Can't figure out why. Ladies, sometimes it's as simple as that. It really is. We are not that complicated a creature. We're really not. Most of us, anyway. There may be a few of us that are, but most of us are just not that difficult to figure out. It really is sometimes as simple as, there's a scratch on the fender and I can't figure out why. The motorcycle won't crank. I can't figure out why. It really is sometimes that simple. And men, yes, they really do think that way. They really do. If it could be a splinter or a brain tumor, guess which one? They tend to go to the furthest extreme. And research, polls, surveys, whatever, regularly, consistently show that the number one issue in married couples' lives is lack of or failure of communication. That's the number one issue that married couples deal with. And many couples, after a while, they get to the place where they don't talk as much as they used to, or they still talk, but there's really no substance to the talking. It's pass the taters, those kind of things. Shut up and pick your dirty socks up. Those kind of things. It's really not really communicating. It's talking. And one of the problems is that we really don't understand what communication is. There's kind of really, I think, and again, I'm going to say some things this morning that are kind of gender-oriented. They're not made to really, they may be funny, but they're not to make fun of one side or the other. I am going to try to be cautious. One of my favorite shows is Andy Griffith, and I remember the time, if you remember the episode where the little boy came to town who was just really a brat, and his daddy was going to give him a spanking, and Andy asked Opie, said, "Don't you think he deserves one?" And Opie says, "I don't want to say. He is one of my kind." And so I am going to try to be a little easy on us men, and be careful here. But listen, let's face facts going into this conversation this morning. There are differences in men and women. We are different. We're wired different. Now, maybe not everyone. Maybe there's some women that have, maybe a few more characteristics like men. Some men, a few more characteristics like women. But basically, we are wired differently. We care about different things. We think in a different way. We communicate in a different way. It's not bad, it's good. It's a balance. It's making one strong where the other one's weak. I just had someone, a lady within the last few weeks, ask me a question, and she used a word. I didn't know what it meant, and come to find out it was a color. And I had to explain to her, I got red, blue, green, yellow. I don't have all them kind of, them fuchsias or whatever. I don't have them in my world. If I had a case of the fuchsia, I'd go to the doctor. We're different. Not only do I not have that color, I don't care. Quite frankly, I just don't care. I don't have it. I don't need it. I don't want it. It just complicates things. We had a conversation this morning. Tabitha and Stephanie's asking me questions about that quilt, and I said, "Do I have to do anything?" And they said, "No." And I said, "Then I don't need to know. I don't need to know." They're telling me about how it happened and all. I don't need to know all that. I operate strictly on a need-to-know basis. But women are different, and you know that. If you've been around one, I hope if you are one, you know you're different. You need to know. I mean, need to know. Not want to know, you need to know. And there's a difference. And somewhere in the middle, we have to meet, and we have to work together and understand a couple things. One thing that we have to understand is, communication is not. Communication is not talking. You can talk and never communicate. You can talk. I'm talking this morning, and for some it's not communication because you've already tuned me out. I know where I rank. I understand that. Now she's laughing at me. I've never seen Tommy sit down so slow in all my life as when he was holding that grandbaby. It just, there's a difference in talking and communicating. Men, here's something that you need to hear, and women need to hear that. Men don't always have to talk to communicate. Men, listening doesn't count as communicating in a woman's world. You got to nod, you got to say or grunt something. If you just sit there, there's been a lot of times when Rhonda was talking about something and I was doing something, and believe it or not, I am capable of doing more than one thing at a time. And you're not listening to me. Yes, I am. No, you're not. Yes, I am. And I would tell her what she said. But I still, in her world, I wasn't listening because I was doodling or I was writing. My eyes were not, focused. And so there's a difference. Communicating is not listening. It is not talking. You can listen and your spouse not feel like you have communicated. Communication, I think the best way to explain it is sharing meaning. When you meet somewhere and you share meaning, that's communication. And so this morning as we talk about communication, I want you to look here with me. We're going to look at a passage that may not be what you were thinking of. If you I told you last week we were going to talk about communication, and may not be exactly where you thought we were going, but it's a passage I think that can help you in your marriage with communication. It can help you in the workplace, with friends, with family. It can help you in your prayer life even. As we look at these three things that James shares with us and tells us about communication. Those of you over here, you can't see. Those of you on this side who don't like my foot on the speaker, you're welcome to come up here and hold my leg up for me, okay? If you don't like my foot on the speaker, because that's where it is right now. And that's communicating, as simple as I know how to put it. That's, I meant what I said and I said what I meant. If you want to come up here and squat down, I'll lay it on your back, I guess. But right now, that's where it's going. But communication isn't just talking. It isn't just listening. And you have to communicate in a relationship, whether it's with your children or with your grandchildren or with your spouse, your employees, your employer. And the ultimate communication is our communication with God. God desires a relationship with us, and that relationship requires communication. And that communication can't just be talking. Some people think they've communicated with God if they spend 10 minutes in prayer telling Him, reading Him their prayer list. No, communication isn't just talking to God. Communication is listening to God. It isn't just listening to God. It's talking to God, listening to God. And the same thing is true in all of our relationships. But there are several problems with communication. Experts say that when you talk with another person, there's actually 6 things that can happen. This is kind of scary if you listen to this list real carefully. 6 things that can happen when you talk to another person. 6 messages that actually can get through. One of them is what you mean to say. And even though I say that one first, all of us know that's not normally what happens. That's the rare one. What you mean to say. Second thing that can happen is they can hear what you actually say. You know that there's sometimes a difference in what you mean to say and what you actually say, right? There's a big difference in those two. There's what you say, what you mean to say. Then they can also hear what happens is what the other person hears. You know there's a difference in what they hear and what you say? You know there's a difference in what they hear and what you mean, right? And most of the times they don't meet anywhere near the middle. Here's when it starts getting tricky. The fourth thing that can happen is what the other person thinks they hear. And then it really gets dangerous. What they think they heard. I can tell you that from gaining a few years and losing some hearing, that's really dangerous. There's been more than once when I thought what I heard. And my blood pressure was already eking up the scale when I realized that's not what they said. That can't be what they said, and ask again. So what the person thinks they heard. Fifth thing is what the other person says about what you said. You ever had that happen? Somebody say something. Well, listen, I've had that happen to me before after church. Somebody come walking up to me after a sermon and say, Jimmy, while you was preaching, I was thinking about so-and-so and so-and-so, and I'm like, really? Either I got to go back and listen to the tape, or you need to go back and listen to the tape, because one of us wasn't paying attention. What they say about what you said, and then finally, what you think the other person said about what you said. Tommy, I heard you said this about my sermon. What you think you said about what I said. And so communications are a real trick. I've tried to get this right. I finally went back and looked it up, and this may just be a good indicator to us about communication. I've been trying to tell you for several weeks leading up to this about that quote that says, you think you heard what I said or whatever. I went back and tried to find that, and I finally found a quote, and I found out that about 6 different people get credit for saying this. And so I don't know who really said it the first time, and it's this statement. It says, I know you believe, you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. You ever felt that way? James here is talking about really not so much communication. He's talking about listening and hearing from God and how God communicates. And he gives us three little things. And I promise you that if you work into your life, your marriage will be better. Your relationships with children, grandchildren, next door neighbors will be better. Your prayer life will be better. Because I don't know if you've realized it or not, but those three things are so closely intertwined you can't separate them. If your marriage relationship is on the rocks, your prayer life will be on the rocks. If your prayer life is on the rocks, your marriage life will be on the rocks. If your relationship with friends is on the rocks, it'll affect your prayer life, or vice versa. It'll affect your marriage. These three things are so closely related that you cannot separate them. And the three things James talks about here this morning are three things that can transform and change the communication. Let's start at home. And carry this out into our prayer life, into our family life. And I changed my wording a little bit last night from what you've got on the bulletin, and thought about it a little bit differently. Same basic idea, but just like the choice of words a little better. And the first thing James says here in that passage, in James chapter 1, verse 19, he says, "Wherefore, brethren, be swift to hear." Swift to hear. And so I think when we look at that, James is saying, how many of you know being swift to hear is not natural? Being swift to talk is natural. Being swift to hear is not normal. Even though we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, which someone told me means we're supposed to listen twice as much as we talk, we don't do that. We're just not, very, very few of us actually are geared that way. And so the first thing we see in this passage is James tells us, first of all, there's got to be a desire to communicate. Whether you're talking about your prayer life, or whether you're talking about with your employer, or whether you're talking about with your spouse, there has to be a plan. There has to be a conscious effort to communicate. There's something in every one of us. We're wired this way. We like to hear our own voices. That's just the way we are. And again, not meant to slam or slander. It's just how most of us are wired. Men in particular, we're fixers. I mean, that's just something in the genetics and the DNA of how most men are wired. They may not be good at it. Now, ladies, that's the difference. I mean, they may not be real good at it, but it's their desire to fix it. It was a man that wrote, that invented duct tape. It was a man that wrote the book, All the Ways You Can Use Duct Tape. I mean, it's men that keep repairmen in business, trying to fix the stuff that is broke. And most of us men, one of the areas we get in trouble when it comes to communication with our spouse is our wife will come home from work or come home from some situation or problem with her mother or her sister or a coworker, and they'll start telling us, well, let me tell you what happened today. And immediately, if we're going to listen at all, we're listening for how can we fix it. And they'll start telling us, well, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd have punched her in the throat. I'll tell you what I'd have done. I'll tell you what you ought to do. Ladies, any of your husbands ever told you that? I'll tell you what I'd have done. Tell you what you ought to do. Tell you how I'd have handled it. That's our nature. Get over it. You might as well listen. If you married one of us, you got one of us. That's the way we are. There may be a few out there, but most of us, that's the way we're wired. Guys, let me tell you something. Most of the time, when your wife comes home and she starts telling you about how bad things went, she don't want you to fix it. She could care less what you think. She doesn't. She already knows what she's going to do, and if you'll sit there and listen long enough, she'll tell you what she's going to do. And God forbid you tell her, no, that's not the way I do it. James said you have to, there's got to be discipline. There's got to be a desire. Look what he says. There's got to be a desire. I didn't change my words on my scripture. There's got to be a desire, a pursuit. You've got to want. Same thing with hearing from God. Same thing in your prayer life. God's not just going to drop a bomb on your head. God said to Abraham, and Abraham said, "Here am I. Speak. Your servant listens." And this, listen, speak. Men, practice that with me. Speak. Your servant listens. Practice that. Hey, come on, men. Speak. Your servant listens. You learn that, and your house life, your home life will get much better. Be swift to hear. Listen, James says that part of a big issue of communication is, listen, and here's, and without going into a lot of it, there's a lot of psychology and things in it, but this is true of men and women. We can listen much faster than the average person talks, especially around here in the South. Most of us have the ability to listen at somewhere in the range of 300 words a minute. Problem is, most people, a lot of people, especially around here, unless you're from Jersey, a lot of us speak somewhere around 80 words a minute. So when you're speaking to me at 80 words a minute, and I'm thinking at 300 words a minute, I got 220 words to spare. And so while you're talking, my mind is just simple science, folks. Your mind is not totally engaged because it doesn't have to be. I can throw my mind on about third speed and listen to everything you're saying. That's why I can write, doodle, read, whatever, and generally, unless you're giving me the theory of relativity or something, I can generally keep up with, what went on with you at work today. I may not can keep up with how to dissect a frog or something, but if you're telling me about the lady at work, how she's got a problem with another lady at work, I can probably keep up with that and watch Sports Center. But don't. I'm getting there. You talk at about 80 words a minute. I listen at about 300. So while you're talking, my mind is formulating all these other ideas. I'm either over here at work, I'm either over here dealing with my problems, I've done jumped ahead of you and solved your problem. It just doesn't take all my brain to listen to you. I'm sorry, it doesn't take all your brain to listen to me. How many of you are daydreaming right now? See there? It just doesn't. It's just the way we're wired. And so communication takes desire, takes a plan. You have to work at communication. And every one of you here that are married, you know what I'm about to say is true. Some of you that are younger, you may not get it yet, but you will. You will. Trust me. You will. When you're young and dumb, some of you don't believe that. Some of you just think you're young. You don't know you're dumb. You are. And you're dating. Oh, you just speak. Oh, listen to it. But I'm going to tell you, after a few years, and I just happen to be the dummy on the stool this morning who's about to stick my foot in my mouth. After a few years, instead of being like, oh, I can't wait till she calls, all that. After a few years, it's, God, will you hush? Thank you, Tommy. The rest of them threw me under the bus. Ladies, y'all are the same way. It's just normal. And after a while, you've pretty much heard it all. I know about people's stuff and business and lives where Rhonda works that I would know those people if they walked up here and slapped me in the face. She hadn't been in her new job 2 weeks now, and I done know those people backwards and forwards. You know what my job is when she comes home telling me that? Shut up and listen. Speak, your servant listens. I'm not telling you I'm good at it. I'm just telling you that's my job. Listen, we need to understand that. Ladies, sometimes you just got to suck it up and listen to ESPN. You just got to deal with it. Sometimes if you married a construction worker, you just got to listen to him talk about driving nails. Sometimes if you married, a garbage picker-upper, you got to listen to the latest story about the garbage being picked up. But it takes work. It takes work to pray. How many of you know that the greatest enemy to prayer is sleep? I'll guarantee you, it's the greatest enemy. Dear Lord, where was I, Lord? A transcript of most people's prayer would be, that's the way it would, just something like that. Now, you wouldn't know if Archie was laughing or snoring, but, it's... I made my nurse snort this week. She's plumb embarrassed. She won't even look at me. But prayer's hard, isn't it? Isn't it hard to talk and to communicate with God? To really communicate. That's not a big deal to say, God, give me this, give me that, give me this, amen. But it's tough to communicate with God, right? So doesn't it stand to reason that it's going to be even more difficult to communicate with your spouse or your children or your grandchildren or your co-workers? That's why James says be swift to hear. That's why he puts it first. You got to work at it. Be fast, be quick, be swift to hear, he says. Before anything else, be swift to hear. And so it takes some effort, and you have to plan. You may have to cut off the television, guys. Yeah, I know. Listen to them, fellas. Women do like this. Men, I know you can watch SportsCenter and listen to her. She doesn't. She thinks if you're not staring at her intently, going, really, you're kidding. That you're not listening. That's not meant to be comical. It's just the truth, fellas. It takes work. It's just that way. It's just the way we're wired. And as much as men, as much as your wife doesn't want an answer, generally, if she wants an answer, she'll ask you a question. Can I get an amen from the women? Men, ladies, as much as you don't want an answer, many times he does. Many times I don't know if y'all figured this out yet. This is not necessarily the most scriptural thing you're ever going to hear, basically. I'm just taking where James said and going from there. Most of us are about like a big old dog. We got about the same hygiene. I mean, we're about the same. And if you pat us on the head every now and then, we're happy. We need a bath about once a month or so. We're good. Deflea us, whatever. Check us for ticks. We're good. But as much as, generally speaking, the woman doesn't want an answer, men generally do. They want their wives to say, well, sounds like you did good. That's, it just is. It's just the way we're wired. But it takes work. Communication, whether you're talking about prayer, whether you're talking about in the workplace, or whether you're talking about at home with your children, it takes work to communicate. And James says, be swift to hear. He backs that up with his second statement. Not only does he say it takes a desire. You have to want to hear. You have to want to hear from your spouse. You also, he says, be slow to anger. To be swift to hear, be slow to speak. Excuse me. Be slow to speak. He takes that a second step and says, not only does there have to be a desire, there has to be discipline. There has to be determination. You have to, bite your tongue. One of the best things, I got 2 words for you for communication. Shut up. Sometimes that's the best thing you can do. Be slow to speak. How many of us, I don't even need you to raise your hand. I know the answer. How many times have you ever said something, and even as it was rolling off your tongue, you were like, come on, quit it. You're standing there looking like, I can't believe that coming out of my mouth. I was just thinking that. That was just bouncing around my head. The next thing I knew, it fell out of my mouth. James says, be swift to hear and slow to speak. You know why I think he says that? He's not just saying be swift to hear so you can jump in and say something. Honestly, again, that's the reason most of us, that's the only reason we're listening. If you don't believe it, you go out and you watch people today at lunch. You watch most groups when they get in communication. When there's a conversation going on, you watch what happens. Most of the time, I don't care if it's a husband and wife, if it's 4 or 5 people standing there, you watch them. And they'll be standing there in a circle, and you can see it. One will start talking, and you can see that the people in the group are waiting. I can't wait till he breathes. When he takes a breath, I'm jumping in. If he'll just fall over dead, I'm going to talk. If he'll hiccup, if he'll sneeze, something. If he says, when he, I'm jumping in there. And that's the way most of our conversations look. You sit there, and the whole time the other person's talking, you're not hearing what they're saying. You're formulating what you're about to say. You spend more time planning what you're about to say. That's why James says you got to be both, swift to hear and slow to speak. Swift to hear, slow to speak. I never will forget, and I'm going to tell this. She's passed away, her husband's passed away. I'm going to tell this. Lena Coffin, one time, some of you know Lena. Lena was there, was in her hospital bed in her living room there, and had her oxygen hose and everything. And myself and Ray and Randy and Keith, we were all sitting there, and I'm sure Price is Right was on because somehow or another in their house they got it 24/7. But we were sitting there, and Randy and Keith, and mainly me and Randy and Keith, if you know Ray, and we were talking, and who knows what. And, we'd been talking for a while, and all of a sudden, we thought Lena was asleep. We didn't really know what was going on. All of a sudden, Lena sits up in the bed and said, "All right, it's my turn to talk." And so we let her talk. We shut up and let her talk. That was what we did. And, that's kind of the way most of us get into conversation. We sit there and, we're just waiting for my turn to talk. My turn. My turn. My turn. And it doesn't have to be what we're talking about. We call it word vomit. That's what, just whatever comes out of your mouth. James says, be swift to hear, slow to speak. And they go together. And think about how that would play into our prayer life as well. Swift to hear, slow to speak. Let me ask you this. You tell me, and you don't need to tell me, you tell yourself. What does your prayer life sound like? Does our prayer life sound a lot more like us talking and God listening? Is there anywhere in our prayer life that's built in for us to listen and for God to talk? Is there anywhere in our prayer life built in? Do we allow places in our prayer life for the Bible to speak and for us just to shut up? Just to listen? There's got to be a desire. You've got to want to hear. And then there's got to be a determination. I am going to bite my tongue. I am going to wait. Every one of us here, men in particular, me and you know this is true. If I'm lying, I'm dying. There have been times when our wife started telling us something, and the answer we gave them was not ultimately for the problem they had. Make sense? They start telling us something, and we think we got it figured out. And so we give them an answer. And they look at us like, "What are you talking about?" "Well, I answered what you were doing." "That's not what I'm talking about." Guys, how many times has that happened to you? Where you said something in response to your wife and she looked at you like you were stupid and went, "That's not what I'm talking about." And you're like, "Really?" Swift to hear, slow to speak. You've all heard the statement, "I've never regretted something I didn't say." Swift to hear, slow to speak. Ecclesiastes says this, Solomon writes this, "A wise man will hear." Not a wise man will speak. How many times do we think somebody's wise by what they say? How many times do we think we will appear wise if we say something? When Solomon, the wisest of them all, said, "A wise man will hear." Swift to speak, slow to hear, and then finally he says this, then there's not only got to be a desire, I want to hear. There's got to be a determination. I'm not going to answer till it's time to answer. I'll speak when it's time to speak. And the final thing James says that will cure much of your communication chaos is be slow to anger. That one comes pretty easy when you're swift to hear and slow to speak. How many of you have ever got angry about something you thought you heard? And come to find out, as we said a while ago, you either heard the wrong thing, they said the wrong thing, you didn't understand what they meant. James says, be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Ladies, let me tell you something. Let me speak for your husbands. I've said this before. If he just said something and it can be taken two ways and one of them makes you mad, he meant it the other way. Say amen, fellas. Just, men generally, I'm not going to tell you never. I've said this from this pulpit before. I know I can make Rhonda mad from right here in what's the speed of light? I could. I just could. I know how. I'm not telling you I have never done it on purpose. But generally speaking, after 33 years of marriage, or almost 33 now, I have learned it's not in my best interest to intentionally make her mad. Am I right, Tommy? Am I right, Martin? It's not in my best interest. It just isn't. It's not good for my health. It's not good for, it's just, listen, I've told y'all before, them little pill boxes, Rhonda puts out my medicine every week. It's not good for my health. I have no idea what does or doesn't go in that bottle. I can't tell you how many times she walks up to me and says, take this. 3 days later, I wake up and, I'm telling people I fell on steps, but the truth is, see, I told you I knew how to make her mad. I fell on steps, I'm just not telling you she pushed me. That's... But be slow to anger. There's no benefit. What good comes out of being angry at your spouse? None. None. And so James says, be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Be mad at the kids. They'll eventually grow up and move out. And by the time it's time to pick your rest home, they will have forgotten. Be mad at the neighbor. But being mad at your spouse is, and I'm not, listen, don't think I'm sitting here saying I never have been. I have been, I'm better at making her mad than I am at being, because I forget what I'm mad about. So, we could talk about that's another difference in men and women too. They never forget. Y'all have heard that story about the man who said, my wife, when she gets upset, she gets historical. He said, don't you mean hysterical? No, historical. She remembers everything I've ever done. But what benefit is there from making your spouse mad? What benefit is there from being angry at your children, your grandchildren? What benefit comes out of being angry at your coworkers, your employees? Generally, very little gets done out of anger. And if it does, it's generally not very good. It's generally not done right. Tommy will probably tell you that he's had employees at Alcar get angry and go to work angry and mess up more than they fixed. Generally, we don't do very good angry. Our minds don't function. Listen, and anger is a good thing. Notice James says be slow to anger. He doesn't say don't be angry. Anger is a good thing. Anger is what keeps you from getting killed at night when somebody kicks in your front door. Anger is what steps in when somebody comes in and insults or assaults your wife or something. Anger is a good thing. The Bible says be angry and sin not. It says not, don't let the sun go down on your anger. It doesn't say anger is bad. It just says control it. And James says be slow to anger. Don't get angry about every little thing. Be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Let me give you a test as we wrap this up. Who you listen to? Who do you listen to? Who do you communicate with? Think about that list for a moment. Who do you actually communicate with? God, your spouse, your children. Who do you actually communicate with? Now let me ask you this. Once you figure out who that list is, who's most important? Who do you listen to the most? Who do you pay the most attention to? Well, I think number one, we'd agree that number one should be God, right? Number two, all of a sudden it gets a little tricky. Because I've seen this, and you probably have. Number two depends a lot of times on whether you're the husband or the wife. Guys, let's be honest. A lot of times we listen to the guy down at the gym. We listen to the fellow at work more than we do our spouse. I didn't get no amen that time. Ladies, a lot of times we listen to mama more than we do our husband. When the Bible makes it really clear, we looked at it last week, that we are to leave mother and father and cleave to our spouse. Many ladies listen way more to their children, communicate way more with their children than they do their spouse. Pay way more attention to the women they work with or the friends they shop with than they do the opinion of their spouse. Who's number three? Who's number four? So I'll promise you this, you're communicating with somebody. You're communicating, you're sharing information, you're sharing feelings with somebody. The only question is who and in what order. And I'll promise you this, that if God's not first, and if you're married, your spouse is not second, then everything else is jacked up. Promise you. Because those are the two most important relationships in your life. You know how I know? Because the Bible says so. The Bible says, leave your parents and cleave to your spouse, and then both of you be like God. Two most important places for you to communicate is God and your spouse. And if it's not that way, something's wrong. Promise you, something's wrong. I want to ask you to bow your heads this morning. You need to come this morning and bow and kneel at this altar and say, Lord, help me learn to communicate with you and with my spouse. God, help me to put you first, that the most important voice in my life is you. And second is my spouse. Perhaps you want to come with your spouse and you want to kneel together and pray. Ladies, some of you may need to come and kneel and say, Lord, I don't understand him. I probably never will. But help me to love him, help me to communicate with him, and help me to understand, Lord, that sometimes it really is just as simple as the motorcycle won't crank. Some of you guys need to come and say, Lord, help me to understand. Help me to remember she's a complicated creature. She is, the manual on her is 10,000 pages long. and I'll never figure her out. But God, you gave her to me. You brought us together. God, help me to learn to communicate with her, to love her, to support her, and to be the husband. Even when she's talking about junk I don't want to hear. Lord, teach me to nod my head and look interested. Some of you here this morning, you're young, you're not married. You better listen to me. I'm not as old as some folks, but I'm old enough. I've made enough mistakes to learn that one. You better learn to listen to your wife. You better learn to listen and communicate with your husband. You want a miserable life? Ignore me. Ignore what the Bible says. God, help me to be slow to wrath, slow to speak, and quick to hear. Help me to be that way with you, Lord. God, I realize this morning that many times my prayer life sounds like me reading a Christmas list of all the things I want you to do. God, teach me to listen to you. You need to come. Maybe you want to pray for your children, your grandchildren, their marriage, someone you work with. In all this age of communication, Skype and Facebook and Twitter and email and all the stuff we've got, we communicate less than we ever have. We don't share feelings. We share a few letters, a few words, LOL, and move on. LOL won't cut it in a marriage. It takes communication. As we stand together.